My name is Robert Bernard. I'm the Executive Director for Nova Scotia Indigenous Tourism Enterprise Network. It's actually a Mi'kmaq word, NSITEN, which means I want you to understand.
First question, learned stuff already. So please describe your job as the Executive Director of NSITEN.
It's more than a job for me. It's life work. We call it nation work. Nation work means that you do things that will help to change the future for your people, for your children, for generations to come. I collect a paycheck every 2 weeks, but that's just a thing about doing the job. But for me, it's way more than the paycheck at the end of the day.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So when we plan events, we usually, it's interesting because there's a thing about time for our people. And the way we look at time is very different than the way society looks at time. And what I mean by that is that we are very loose with time. So I didn't arrive here on time, but that's another story. Our people really look at time as when you are meant to be there is when you're meant to be there. When something happens, there's a reason for that to happen at that time, at that location. Like it's just meant to be, right? And for us, when we're planning, of course we plan for, certain dates and times and, all of that to take place, but we're not stuck on something starting at 9 o'clock, 7 o'clock, whatever it is. We'll put a general time and when it starts and when it finishes. And we only include those time elements for all the other people that are worried about the time factor. It's not so much us, right? So it's for everybody else that comes that kind of wants to feel comfortable about a regimented system that we don't operate through. We're not very regimented people in general. We flow like water. It's like that's how things go, and you go from here to here, and it's hard to explain. But so when we host events, we want to make sure that all age groups participate. We want to make sure that we target elders' participation. Another big thing about our people, I think, is that we don't forget about our elders. Another important thing about our people is that we don't forget about our elders. And the reason why is that there's an understanding that when you're born, you go through life, you become a toddler, a teenager, an adult, and then you get into your, elderly life. And then we don't actually put older people in homes. We take them home instead of putting them into homes. And we know that their life circle is finished soon because when they die, we believe that they, start another life cycle as another baby. So it's kind of like that circle of life is always there. So we always kind of take care of our elders and we have them as part of our conversations. In today's society is a challenge because they're like, why would you want to include all these older people? Like society devalues older people. We actually value them even more. Now, there's always that case of making sure that somebody is specialized in a certain way of being either a cultural leader, a political leader, somebody that's understanding, let's say, the environment. So there are special backgrounds, I guess we could say, when we involve them in conversations. But there's also some people that are very generally knowledgeable about everything, and what they're knowledgeable about is process, protocol, respect, inclusion, like all those elements that you don't have to be involved in business or politics or whatever that topic is. There's always the conversation about, okay, are you respectful? Are you inclusive? Did you consider, back a few years ago, it was both sexes. Now it's all sexes, right? Did you include the mother? Did you include the youth? Did you include the elder? Those are constant conversations for our people when we have inclusive conversations. That is the role of the elder, to make sure that the adults and the younger people that are the leaders don't forget who they are, don't forget what protocols exist in their culture, because we can't just operate like everybody else. It's like that reminder, hey, don't forget about, what we're supposed to be doing. So they are the ultimate reminders of process in our community. So that's why they're so valued. And they don't typically take sides. Like they don't take the side of, whether it's their family. What they take sides on is the right thing to do. And if it's the right thing to do, no matter how difficult it is, they will typically state that you should do this based on protocol, based on what's happened in the past. That's why they're so valuable in that context of having them involved. Yeah. So when planning, I guess, we always try to be as inclusive as possible. So, we look at what's happening in other communities. We don't like to plan events at the same time and be competitive with other events. Like we want to make sure that there's times that are, supportive of other things that are happening in the community. We want to make sure that, we plan it out enough time so that, again, elders can take part, cultural knowledge keepers can take part. And then, of course, family units are very important in our people. So when we talk about Mawiomis, it's always a family-oriented event. We don't just invite the males, which in mainstream society, the males seem to be the leaders. It's changing, mind you. There's a lot of female leaders now. But in general, society was always about the males years ago. We are a matriarchal society, which means the mothers were always the leaders in our people. So they were the ones, obviously, that gave birth to you, right? So, and the story goes that, we brought you into this world and we can take you out of this world. So they were always kind of like the leaders for our people, and we respected that. We didn't, and so their voices have always been strong too. So, so making sure that families are respected and included was always a big thing. Yeah, in terms of breaking down, like who does what, so we're in the middle of hosting this tourism conference. We want to make sure that we are including our partners, as in everybody from community partners to business partners to allies. People may not understand who allies are, so just to be clear, allies would be, in most cases, the non-Indigenous people that work with us closely. That could be organizations, that could be businesses, that could be education institutions, corporate companies, could be individuals. You could be an ally just by saying, yes, Robert, how can I help your community, your people, your organization in delivering what they think is an important, either a deliverable in an event or an organization that might be doing something in a community level or whatever that is. You can be considered an ally as an individual as well. So when we're hosting, like for example, what's going on with us is that we're delivering a tourism conference, but we're also recognizing people through awards. So obviously other organizations do awards banquets, but we're actually including lifetime achievement awards with the work that people have been doing for their life. And typically, sometimes these people don't get recognized. And for us, artists and musicians are one of those very important people in our culture because they tell the story of our people through song and through art. So some of our most valuable artists and musicians continued to tell the story of the orators, of those storytellers, through song, through the creation of art. So those are some of the elements that we talk about, but so we're honoring those. We're also taking into account how we can express culinary, the food element. So it's really challenging today to try to serve 200 people a traditional meal because you're doing it in a non-Indigenous mainstream kitchen setting, and a lot of our food is from a they call it it's like wild food. It's like it's not so again, when you're talking about policy and government, they have a policy on meats, let's say, for example. You're not allowed to bring any kind of food like wild meat into a restaurant or a major setting like a major event unless that food or that meat has been butchered from a professional butcher.
What considers a professional butcher?
A person that's in business that's certified to be the cutter of the meat.
Okay.
So they determine whether the meat is good and how the meat is prepared and all that stuff. So our people have been hunters and fishers all of our many generations forward. They don't need somebody that's certified to tell them how to cut or how to prepare meat or how to cook meat. We have cooks and hunters and fishers that's been doing this for many, many generations. We don't need policy to tell us who's good at doing that and who's like making sure that they can look at the meat and the fish and just smell it and know that it's good. Like in that sense, right? The policy is not going to smell the fish. The policy is not going to, look at the meat. Like, so I guess that's part of the reason why, the butcher is so counted upon as the green light guy, that it's good, right? So they in general, they trust that policy through that system. We trust our way of doing things through our system, but that they don't overlay when it comes to having events. So that's a challenge. We have to think about those things. But I have a team right now of probably 7 or 8 people that are planning a whole bunch of different things between the award ceremony to the food to the workshops. We have to think about how many different workshops we want to talk about tourism, like the business aspect, the tax aspect. Let me see now, what else? Sustainability was one of the things we talked about. The cultural aspect. So a number of these workshops have different people that are delivering those workshops. So you have to call them and make sure that, they're available. And I'm trying to break it down. So all the things that we talk about. And then, of course, availability, the cost of, them traveling. They need hotel rooms. They need, the presentation factor, like when they come in, are they bringing their laptop? Are they going to use it? Are they bringing a stick? Are they, is there a screen? Is there a flip chart? Is there a microphone? Like all those things go into planning these major events. So that's just one workshop. If you have 4 workshops, all of those things have to be taken care of. So I'll give you an example. We are doing 16 workshops in 2 days. So we have to do that 16 times with 16 different presenters. That's just the workshops. Now you have the main area where you have the keynote speakers. The keynote speakers are usually the ones that speak to the entire crowd. They have to have a little longer, broader conversation with the crowd about what's happening, not so much with the business owner, but what's happening to the community, to the industry, to the government, whatever that topic is. Much broader topic that is inclusive of all of the crowd. So you got to be very strategic on who you ask, what that topic is going to be. I'll give you an example. One of the topics is the Atlantic Indigenous Tourism Strategy. What is that? Well, that is all about how do we work together to create a strategy that's all inclusive of all of the Indigenous tribes in the Atlantic region. Not just, so Mi'kmaq are the main.
How many tribes?
So there's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's probably 8 or 9 in the Atlantic region. Yeah, 8 or 9. No, because for example, in BC, there's probably 30 or 40 in just BC.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, there's probably more like 30. So yeah, in Canada, there's over 60 different tribes and languages. Yes. So when I said before that I don't like to be called Indigenous, all of those tribes don't like to be called Indigenous because there's so many different ones, right? From Cree to Ojibwe to Mi'kmaq to Maliseet, all across Canada. But so when you're planning that event, you're planning that keynote person, you also have to have the trust that that keynote is going to deliver on, that full, usually 1 hour to an hour and a half is usually a typical keynote. That's a lot of time for someone to deliver. So if they don't have the experience, you're putting a lot of trust in that individual to deliver on that topic for that day.
So do all 8 tribes have to
So no,
pick
for
one person?
no. So if it's an Atlantic initiative, then you would, again, it's that conversation of doing it from a business perspective or a political perspective, right? This is a business kind of a audience, and again, this event is just particularly for Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia. So, but the conversation could be about what's happening across Nova Scotia, across the Atlantic region. This particular one is what's happening in the Atlantic region, and it was about a study. It was about like what our organizations are doing, what government is doing, what industry is doing. It's all those components of what's affecting the growth of Indigenous tourism in Atlantic Canada. So going back to the keynote speaker, and then you got to think about, okay, how many keynotes can you have in 1 day, 2 days, 3 days? So our event is actually 3 days. So that's a lot of work when it comes to how many, So keynotes would be people that speak to the entire crowd, one person. Then you have panels. You could have a panel where I'm sitting or you're sitting as the facilitator, and then there's 2 or 3 or 4 people sitting in different, seats beside you, and then you're asking each one of them a question. So that could be a form of a keynote, but now it's a panel format. Mm-hmm. It's still about an hour usually, could be an hour and a half. You're asking those questions, and then typically you would have microphones in the crowd where people would ask questions after a panel conversation of, let's say, an hour to an hour 15. They leave usually 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. Typically, the keynote doesn't have a Q&A session. Sometimes they do, if they're very confident, and if they, because some of these times there could be challenging information that's being presented. The other aspect that you have to be considerate of is the location that you're planning your event. So, for example, for us, where we're planning our event is Hotel Halifax. The main area of where everyone is going to be is on the 8th floor. But the workshops are going to be on the 1st floor. So let's say if you had your keynote from 9 till 10:30, you can't have your workshop starting at 10:30 on the 1st floor. So there's a transition time that takes place between point A to point B, going down 2 sets of elevators and taking 200 people there, right? So we built in 15 minutes just for transition times for going there and coming up. Ego, igande, ha, ego, guandu, dana, hey.